But yes, as a general rule, I'm all for missing the lyrics because your eyes are on the road.
Yeah. I'm like, man, I used to know the song like the back of my fucking hand. But it's been a while. And singing while sitting in a car with road noise is actually really bad for you.
Yeah, okay.
It doesn't produce the best sound, but I don't give a shit.
Yeah, there you go. We're driving down the highway. You know what that means. It's time for Superhero Ethics on the Road. And some Magic players will have gotten that joke. Hey everybody, this is Matthew. I'm one of your hosts.
Hello, I'm Jacob, and welcome to Car Talk 2, the long-awaited sequel to Car Talk.
This time we will not be talking about Supernatural, but once again, Jacob and I are on the road. We are heading towards a Magic event, and we thought this would be another great time to do a somewhat off-the-cuff podcast. We have a good episode lined up for you, a topic I think you're really going to enjoy. We have written up an outline. That outline is now on a phone that is currently being used to record it. So that outline lives in our minds, and I'm sure we will do a perfect job of following it exactly. But either way, I think we have a really good topic for you guys today. What we want to be talking about today is one of these broader topics, and this is going to touch on a lot of superhero stories, but instead of looking at just one story, we want to look at a larger question, which is when you have a society or a community or a world where some people have powers and some people don't, and there's a fairly wide gulf between those populations, what happens? Like a couple of times now on our episodes about the Psi Corps, on our episodes about the Sokovia Accords, we've touched on this, but we've never really dived into this question of who holds power, who should hold power, how do you manage power relationships, all of these questions that come up. And so we're really excited to be talking that with you guys today. Jacob, what's kind of overall, I know you were actually the one who suggested this topic, so where are you kind of coming from with this?
So this was very clearly inspired for anybody who knows Matthew and I at all. You'll know that I was pushing for Matthew to watch the next arc, the next story in the Avatar series. So we've actually started watching Korra, and that sort of sparked this idea. The first season of Korra has, and we're not going to get into Korra too much because we're not done with it. Matthew's not done with it, at least. I'm done with it. But there are many other, as Matthew mentioned, there are many other of these situations where you've got this dynamic of some people have power, right? Some people have this agency over their world that others don't, and it either establishes this dichotomy of the feared powered and the fearful normals, or it establishes the empowered powered, right, where they are put into positions of leadership, and then you have sort of these, taking a second tier situation like you have in the Avatar world, where the people with the martial arts magic, the kung fu magic, they tend to be in more prominent positions in their areas because of their ability to do bigger and better things.
Exactly. Excuse me. We've actually been having a lot of discussions about that in terms of Legend of Korra and we're only about 2/3 of the way into the first season, and I'm not going to give any spoilers, but I'll say I am so far enjoying the show, but have a very significant philosophical disagreement with the show because, as Jacob said, the main tension of the show right now is between the people with powers and the people who don't have powers, and I find myself not much more on the side of those who don't have powers in that particular world. And again, we're going to do a full episode on that, so we're not going to get into that too much. But we both agree this is a really interesting topic because it is one that keeps coming up. And so let's just kind of start there. Let's kind of just name some of the shows and movies and stories where we think we see this, because we're gonna dive into some specific aspects. But I think it'll help to lay out for our listeners, first of all, if you don't know any of the stories, just to give you a bit of the context, but even more, to kind of give you a better, we're talking about a kind of esoteric, broad topic here, so I want to narrow it down a little bit.
Right.
And also, go ahead.
So, first of all, you can't talk about this topic without talking about the biggest elephant, being the X-Men.
Yep.
Right? The X-Men are, this is the X-Men story post, the 80s and beyond, right? Where it becomes, the predominant narrative becomes about the quote, normal people, the unpowered, the non-metahumans, being so afraid of these people cropping up all over the place who have, they can shoot fire out of their hands, or they can make other people's brains explode with their minds, right? These are terrifying powers, right? That just a random person you're walking along the street could have, and that there are people in positions of power in the government without any magic powers, right, that use this fear to institute a system of control.
Right.
Just like with the Psychor in Babylon 5 when telepaths started appearing on Earth in that universe.
And I'm really glad you started with X-Men, because I think X-Men in many ways is one of the most interesting examples of this, because often we are talking about a show or a movie or a story that gives us two perspectives. The people with power and the people who don't have power, and they're in conflict. X-Men adds a third dynamic in a way that I think makes a lot more sense, which is it says, in the background, we're going to tell you that there are all sorts of people who have different reactions to these people with powers. But the main conflict is between two different groups of people with powers who are, at the end of the day, fighting about how should the mutants, react to this question. In that, Professor Xavier really wants to have the kind of assimilationist model, that they want to convince people, yes, mutants are different, but they're really not that different, and we can all live together in harmony. Magneto has much more the perspective of, we are different, and in his mind, and with some good reason, we are a higher evolved species, and so we should be treated differently. And some tellings of Magneto, it becomes almost kind of Darwinistic, and he has a real, I think we're better than everybody else. In other tellings, and these are the ones that I admit I like more, he is more coming from a position of not mutants are better, but that mutants need to be separate because we're just not safe among the regular people. But I love how X-Men, balances that bridge and shows us a number of different perspectives, mostly among the mutants, but also does that somewhat within the different human communities. I also think you mentioned another really good one, which is Psychor in the Babylon 5 story. And for those who are recent listeners, you may not have heard Jacob and I talk about this. It was one of Jacob's first actual episode on the podcast, where we used to rope him in. Interesting, a story on psychological manipulation. That was what I used to get him in the podcast.
Psychological manipulation.
Exactly.
That, and then shortly thereafter, we had an episode on robotic people, right?
Yes.
On Data and Ida and stuff like. And so you roped me in by pushing all my buttons.
It's kind of
social
perfect.
engineer Matthew Westfox.
There you go. But the point being, for those who haven't seen it or haven't heard that episode, one of the major plot points in Babylon 5 is that a few hundred years in the future, humans with telepathic abilities have emerged. And there is now a real question about how do we regulate them. And I think that's another really interesting question, because there again, it doesn't really make it about a good guy and a bad guy, because it does actually a very interesting job of saying it's terrible that humanity is so afraid of the telepaths. But because humanity is so afraid of the telepaths, the telepaths have had to be forced to all work together and do things that are utterly terrifying.
Right.
And it becomes this kind of self-justifying loop, and you can argue which one is first. But it gives a really good breakdown, because there it's not easy to say either one group is right or wrong. Both groups are really kind of acting in really problematic ways that make that impossible to find a balance of power between the two.
Right, and part of the big problem with the Psychor, and the reason why it comes to a head the way that it does, is that each situation, each type of individual, what the telepaths call the mundanes and the telepaths, are each reacting to what the other one is doing in the negative.
Yeah.
So it starts off with the non-telepaths deciding that the telepaths all need to be, corralled and contained in a particular location, and the telepaths respond, going, "Okay, well, we're gonna while we're all here in the same place, let's teach each other.
Yeah.
Let's train each other. Let's see if we can be a benefit to your society." And then the telepaths start becoming more competent, start becoming better at this. So then the normals start to rely on them for things like business negotiations and things like that. But the telepaths keep getting better, keep getting more proficient, and keep getting better about not letting people know when they're using their powers and when they aren't. There's this whole performative aspect that the Psychor does, where it's all like, yeah, we're not legally allowed to invade your thoughts in this moment, but do you know? Do you know if we're touching your mind right now?
Yeah.
Who's to say?
And I think that's one of the interesting things that the Psychor also raises is, and I think it's one of the dynamics we talk about, how much does everybody else know who does or who doesn't have powers?
Right.
And this, I think, is at the heart and soul of one of my other favorite examples of this, which is the Sokovia Accords in the MCU. Because there, one of the things that really gets pushed, and this is drawn out more in the comics than in the movies and TV shows, but I think it's still there, is the idea of it's not just that one of the things that people find scariest is not just that there are other humans out there who have far more powers than I do, but that I won't know it.
Right.
And so if someone does something, it's going to be hard for me to figure out who did it, and I don't know when I'm in danger and when I'm not. And I think that raises a whole other issue because, on the one hand, if you think about all of the different ways that people might be afraid of other people with powers, and one of the ways they could do that, one of the ways they could respond to that, in my mind, at first glance, saying, well, all we're going to do is say, we just want to register who has powers and who doesn't, just so we can keep track, we're not going to put any other limitations on. That seems fairly benign compared to some of the other limitations that could happen, until you realize what a fundamental invasion of privacy that is, and how badly that kind of registering of different people in the past has always gone.
And it makes it very easy if you've got a list. Here's all the potential problems is the way you can look at that list.
Right.
You've got them all in one handy dandy location, and people can get access to that, even if it's not, even if it's not your government, even if it's not people in power. If you've got all that information in one location, if somebody can access it,
yep,
now they have the power to enact change that they think is correct on a lump group of people, all because you decided to put them on a list, right? To say these people need to go on a list for all of our protection and safety.
Yeah. And that would be another one we bring up. The other one that I'm going to really want to bring up, and then Jacob, tell me if there's any more that you haven't mentioned. On Car Talk here, you're going to hear our helpful friend in the car telling us when toll booths are coming up. But in the DC universe, and this comes out, as I said, mostly in the TV show Superman, the animated, and then Batman, the animated series, and especially in the Justice League animated show. And then in what I think is one of the few really good points about this movie, in the Suicide Squad movie as well, is the character of Amanda Waller and the perspective in that universe of the humans for whom the idea isn't how do we regulate people at their normal selves, but how do we protect ourselves if these people go bad? And I think, for me as well, that is also one of the really interesting things, because I think one of the things that often happens is we often get stories where the people with powers are portrayed more as the hero, and with good reason, and the restrictions that are being put on them seem really problematic. But at the end of the day, some level of the hero argument seems to be, you can trust us with our powers. To me, it's the Captain America argument that always drives me so crazy in Civil War. And there's many other times where it is. Because, and maybe here I'm cynical, I've always believed you don't make laws, you don't make legal systems.
80 East.
I'll let that finish. You don't make laws, you don't make legal systems based on people being at their best. And especially in worlds where things like, red kryptonite can cause Superman to do what he does, or people can be blackmailed or affected and mind controlled. There always has to be some concern about how do we handle things if things go really bad.
Right. And systems like that are always tricky, because if you presume the worst of human behavior and then give that human the ability to, with the power of their mind or wave of their hand, they are suddenly a weapon.
Right.
Now you're talking about having to effectively implement gun control laws, but on a person.
Yeah.
And that's a bag of cats we've not had to deal with, right? Not really. You hear there's the fiction of the person being licensed as a lethal weapon, just with their bare hands or whatever. But like in reality, that's not
right.
It's not a real thing as far as I understand it. But when you're dealing with regulating a person because of the impact that their individual capabilities has, that's a really sticky area as far as ethics are concerned. I think think that from a societal protection standpoint, from keeping people safe, it's easy to make the argument, right? But it's easy to then twist that argument and turn it around into establishing internment camps for powered people, because it's the only way to keep society safe.
Yeah.
Because they're different, and the way they're different is dangerous to us.
Well, and we've talked before about the whole reason for this podcast existing is because we think these movies, these TV shows, these stories do such a good job not only of telling us completely fictional stories about completely fictional people, but of telling us stories that mirror questions in our own world. And we're talking about people with powers far beyond any we can imagine, but like the question you just brought up, that at the end of the day comes 100% down to how do you balance the rights of the individual with the rights of the community? Right. And that's a question that's absolutely a huge part of our own world. The idea of how do you legislate difference? And, in our own world, the range of human possibility is much more limited than it is in a superhero world. But we still do have these kind of questions, and in most professional sports, there are, in boxing, for example, there are weight classes, because it's not that every human being is expected to be able to fight every other human being fairly. Some of those make a lot of sense. Some of those are being done by gender in ways that may make some sense to begin with, but also get really problematic in terms of as we expand our definitions of how gender works, and that it's not quite the binary we thought it was. So the point being that all of these, I think, are questions that, as esoteric as they seem in the comic book world, the superhero world, do have mirrors in our own world, and it's something we're definitely talking about. I mean, certainly all the things about putting people on lists. Yep. You can look at every fascist country that's ever happened. You can look at what is happening in this country with wanting to document immigrants and the like. All of these things often have real world parallels.
And I think it is interesting and a good reflection of how our world would behave that in the stories where the powered people can come from anywhere, can come from any background, you have this narrative of how do we control them, how do we make sure we're safe. And in worlds where the powered people are in positions of power, right, where they're in the government, they're in the, they're the movers and shakers of the world, like the world of Avatar, that's not really the conversation now.
Right.
Because they're the people making the laws, so of course they're not going to regulate themselves differently than others. I mean, obviously there are crimes that they can commit or actions they can take that unpowered people can't take.
Right.
But there's no extra scrutiny as far as we can tell.
Well, and so let's start diving into some of the specific questions that come up, because you're raising what is, I think, not the only one, but it's really in some ways the heart and soul of this, which is who has power? And to your mind, once you start having a population that has very different levels of power and of ability, and you have a certain group of people who can do things beyond the wildest comprehension of another significant part of the population, how does that start changing things in terms of, like, what do you think are the questions that come up in terms of who holds power?
So, power is an interesting word here. I like that you've chosen it because power, in the example I was describing just a little bit ago, is held by the same people. There are two different kinds of power, right? There's the power to control societal change, or control legal change, or control how how our societal constructs interact with these things. And then there's the individual power. There's the supernatural powers, right? The ability to affect the world around you. The question of who has the power in each of those specific instances directly informs what the responsibilities of those people are. If you have the ability to affect massive physical change, or what have you, because you have these magical supernatural powers, and you also are a world leader, right?
Right.
You have two forms of power, both of which can affect substantial change to the world around you, and that increases your level of accountability more than if you had either of those individually.
Yeah.
Right?
I think that's a really important distinction to start with, especially because, and I would sort of name this, and in all these things, like we're trying to answer broad questions that are going to be very different in each specific of the contexts we name, or any of the other ones that people can think of. But I would say, to me, as a real starting point, one of the first things that's going to make me be very suspicious and very concerned is if the simple fact of having these supernatural or superhuman abilities is what gives people political power. I have a very egalitarian spirit, and I am generally not comfortable with stories that seem to be framed around, like I said, the kind of one version of Magneto that posits him as believing that mutants are a higher evolved form of life and therefore get to hold power over their lessers. And it's part of why I like those stories so much, though, is because I think as much as there's a part of me that wants to say, I need to believe that just because you can fly and just because you have superhuman intelligence, that one in particular, or any of these other things, you don't get to have a more powerful vote than I do. I think it's very hard to conceive of a world in which people would be that much more powerful than a normal human and not to some degree start thinking that they deserve that.
Right.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, like, we kind of touched on this a little bit with Red Sun, in that we noted that it was something that made Superman exceptional, is that he could hold all of that personal power and still hold the belief that he should be accountable to others.
Right.
Right? And it is something that, like, I understand why you would be cautious of those stories, because it is a very troubling narrative when the people with all the magic, right, are also in direct control over their world. That sounds pretty tyrannical, right? What agency do the common folk have against a government, a governing body that has all of this supernatural power backing it as well?
Right.
Now, there is a very troubling narrative you could make around the Second Amendment that we're not going to get into about this, but there's a parallel to be drawn there.
Right.
Right? Some proponents of the of Second Amendment rights believe that the reason why people should be entitled to firearms in the United States is so that we have some agency to overthrow a corrupt government.
And we're not going to get too into that. I fundamentally disagree with that because I think there's a number of misreadings of history in that perspective. But I think in terms of the discussion we're having today, you are correct, and that especially as more and more, it's one thing to think of that our current American government has all of this military power. That gets quadrupled when they also have all these supernatural human powers.
Right.
And I think in some ways that's kind of a low-hanging, like, and I named it, so I'm talking to myself here. It is somewhat the low-hanging fruit. To me, where the story really gets interesting, though, is, like I said, when you start asking, how is it possible to ask people who have those powers not to see themselves in that way? And it's not that I don't think we should. I think we need to. But, like, just to give an example where I think this happens in our own world, I know that I have had many times where I have looked at political results, and I have looked at the factual inaccuracies and misunderstandings of basic science or of basic fact held by people who also hold political views different than my own. And it's really easy to fall into a narrative of, gosh, there should be an IQ test of who can vote. And I don't believe that for a second, but I know it's a thought that's occurred to me, and I know that in our world, that isn't, every day I go on Facebook or Twitter, and I see people who in theory agree with me politically who very much hold that view. Certainly an awful lot of science fiction. I've mentioned this before, how much I dislike a lot of Robert Heinlein. I think Robert Heinlein had some wonderful ideas, and he's a very good writer, but he is very much a intellectual fascist. He's very much of the perspective of the problem with humanity is that the stupid people get to make the decisions, and that if only the smartest people were the ones making all the decisions, then everything would be better. And
right. It's the conceit we've talked about before, where there's this presumption that intelligence is universal, right? Where if I'm smart about one thing, I have equally great intelligence about literally everything on the face of this green earth, and that is not how it works.
Right.
And it's very sort of narrow definition. Like, how do you define the most intelligent?
Right. And to me, I don't even think that's the question, because I still think as an egalitarian, to me, and an intellectual aristocracy, even if it was accurately picked, I think I'd still have real problems with. But I think it's a real human temptation. And I think there's a part of me that would raise my eyebrows every time I see a story about someone who says, yes, I can shoot lasers out of my eyes and, do incredible feats, but I think I should have just as much political power as anyone else. I think that the human temptation to feel like I am better than someone else, they are inferior to me, and thus I should hold a higher place of power. I mean, all of human history points to the fact that that's a very strong temptation.
Right. I mean, and look at Batman. He's a great example of somebody who clearly doesn't believe that. He has a lot more means than other people in the world, and he uses those means to enact the change he wants to see on the world. Right? The entire character of Batman is, when you boil it down, somebody who had an opportunity to seize control over some portion of the world around him and took it.
Right.
Because he had the power to do so. In this case, power was, he had the detective skills and he had the fiscal means to fund a bunch of magical toys that he now gets to play with.
Yeah, I mean, and I've said before, Batman is probably my favorite hero in this whole wide universe, the many universes, but is also, I think, a very problematic one for exactly the reasons you're talking about, because there's nothing egalitarian about him. And in a lot of the stories, he's very clear about that he thinks that he has, in the sort of Justice League stuff that I was talking about before, he often becomes one of my favorite characters because he's the one who's the most cynical. He's the one who's always, Amanda Waller, he's the one who has the most sympathy for her because he is very much on the, of course Superman might turn bad, of course Wonder Woman might turn bad. What I think redeems him, at least in those stories, is, and there's one particular episode, I believe it's of the Justice League animated series, but where specifically Amanda is sort of saying, well, but why do you think you're any different? Which is when he says to her, I don't, that's why I need you. Mm-hmm. Because he is just as clearly saying, just as much as Superman can go bad, just as much as Wonder Woman can go bad, I could go bad, and someone needs to protect us from me.
Right. And we've talked about this particular theme before, where when you've got power, regardless of whether you've seized it, or whether it was innate, right? Whether you were born with it, like in the case of Superman,
right?
Or the mutants, there is an ethical compulsion for you to hold yourself accountable to the privilege that extra power gives you, right? And what that allows you to do. And it's true in real life too. Like, we don't need to have supernatural powers to have this dilemma, right? Privilege exists in all kinds of situations. I say, as the most privileged person in the car right now, right? You can be in a position in your life where you have more capability to enact change, or more capability to be heard, right, than some others.
Right.
And what's important is that you acknowledge that privilege, that power that you have, so that you can then hold yourself accountable for your actions, hopefully through others, but at the bare minimum, asking yourself the question of, should I be doing this? Is this correct? Or am I taking advantage of my position, of my capabilities?
Well, and so that's a good way to actually, I want to frame a question this way. And let me also just say, I am also a person of an immense amount of political and social and financial privilege. Jacob's referring to the fact that I am disabled and he is not. There's probably many other ways in which privilege dances back and forth between the two of us. But I'm certainly very much a privileged person as well. But let me ask you this, Jacob, because I think this ties into a lot. The Spider-Man line that comes from his uncle is, with great power comes great responsibility.
Right.
Do you agree with that?
I do.
Okay.
I actually feel that, and I mean, we've had this conversation a little bit. I feel like there's a distinction between responsibility and compulsion to act.
Right.
Right? I feel as though when you have power, the actions that you choose to take, there needs to be accountability to those actions. You need to be held accountable to them. If your decision is to not use your power, I guess what I'm saying is you don't have a responsibility to use it, but if you're going to use it, you have a responsibility to use it ethically.
Okay, well, because that, I think, is an interesting dynamic, And granted, I'm not as much of a Spider-Man expert as some others, and please write in if you have thoughts on this. But as I understand it, I think Uncle Ben would disagree with you pretty much.
I know Uncle Ben 100% disagrees with me.
Because,
I agree.
Because that his understanding of it is, if you have the ability to do good, and you have the power to do good, then you absolutely should. And I wrestle with that one because, on the one hand, I think that what a good statement to people of privilege.
Mm-hmm.
You have the ability to help the poor, you should help the poor. You have the ability to help someone across the street, help them across the street. But that's also where noblesse oblige comes from.
Right.
That's where the idea of, I have the power to help these poor people, and so I need to help these poor people in the ways that I think, which very quickly becomes, I know what's best for them and all of that. And so that's why I asked that, because I think in some ways that one question is at the heart of what this is about, is if you have significantly more power over someone else, what is your responsibility towards them, and how do they have agency in that? Because I think that's where I think there is something to be. I can understand why someone's saying, like, I am a near godlike person, I have to protect these people. But to what extent do they have to ask you to be protected?
Right. And it's a question that Superman stories very rarely ask. And I think, like, with good reason, that's not the narrative, right? But you could very easily see a circumstance where we have what happened in The Incredibles, where Mr. Incredible saves somebody, right? This is the opening narrative of the movie. He saves somebody, but in the process of doing so, the person gets injured, right? Has a neck injury or something to that effect. And there's this whole, like, he didn't ask to be saved. He didn't want to be saved. And then Mr. Incredible is held accountable for the consequences of his actions by making the choice for that other person.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, I think that's fair. It's very weird because, like, I feel like the idea of the Good Samaritan, right? The idea of, if I'm able to help you, I should. If I can, like, save your life or what have you. Like, that gets you into trouble, like, if say you're a medical professional.
Right.
Somebody doesn't want to remain on life support, for example. Like, what's your moral obligation? You have the power.
Yeah.
Right? You have the power. What are you supposed to do?
And that's, I think that raises a really good question, is, because at the end of the day, like, if aliens want to blow up the planet, I think we can assume that most people probably don't want the planet to be broken up, and heroes can probably assume that most people, well, given the current state of humanity, maybe not most of us, because maybe I'm not even sure I am, but you know what I mean, like, stopping a cataclysmic global destruction event,
right.
Sure. But the question then, I think, it becomes more and more, as you push further, what is the definition of helping? Because what is the definition of who gets to decide what helping looks like?
Mm-hmm.
And I think not even, when you talk to the medical, I don't even want to go as extreme as the euthanasia kind of case. I used to work at a disability rights law firm where a lot of our clients were people who had fairly severe mental illnesses, but were still living what were for them livable lives. And they lived in squalor, or they lived in situations that other people would look at and be very judgmental of, but they weren't an active threat to their own life, and they weren't an active threat to the safety of anyone else. So the question becomes, can other people help them by forcing them to go on their medication? That's a very complex topic, and I'm not going to try to get into it here. I will say, in general, I'm very much on the subject of you let the people decide. But I think that's the thing, especially if you're a person with great power. Like I appreciate, even in some of the Spider-Man stories more recently, we have some, and they're often portrayed for comedic value, but you sometimes get moments where Spider-Man kind of assumes someone needs to be helped and leaps to their defense, only to realize he has fundamentally misunderstood the situation. I think there was one Spider-Man comic where he thought he saw someone, being attacked, and it winds up he's interfering with a movie set,
Yep.
Something like that. But with any of those things, and I think that becomes another real question, is if you're a person in power, at the end of the day, I always want accountability and I always want agency. And I think I mentioned this before, that I am very uncomfortable in any situation where one person is both sort of the arbitrator of law and the enforcer of law. And the more of a society where you say the people with great power are going to be asked to enforce the power of the state, the power of the law, whatever it is, sure, but then they should have as little to do with the actual deciding of what that law is. Or at least no more so than anybody else.
Right. It gets tricky. Especially when you're trying to apply this to real life, because you could argue that, in this day and age, if you have any kind of significant social presence, then you have power to enact positive change. And that's why when you asked me about the great power, great responsibility, and I pivoted it into a compulsion to act, right? Because I feel like saying that you are required to do that, when you don't necessarily have all the information, or when your idea of what is best might not match up with who you would be affecting. Right? And that's tricky. And sometimes, you end up having people are in positions where they end up having to make a decision that affects other people, and they make the best decision that they can. But it's the responsibility, I feel, is it comes into play more even after the decision is made. But like before the decision, you vet it, you think about it, but like afterward, if it turned out that it wasn't right, part of accountability is some form of reparation, right? Some form of remedy. And that I feel is where the real responsibility of great power plays in.
Yeah.
Right? Where you're not done with it just because you did a thing that you felt was right.
And I like that a lot more, because then now it's no longer about you have the responsibility to use this power to go out and fix everything. It's not calling you to be a white knight, but instead it's saying you have the responsibility to really be observant and analytical and discerning to try and figure out when are the times when your power is needed or not. And that's where, and it's something I think I've come back to again and again, it's that to me, I'm always going to be happier in a situation where it is the people without the power asking the powered people to intervene, asking them to help. And at the end of the day, I think the thing that I tend to be the most afraid of is gut instinct. It's the trust. It's the, and this is in our own world, is that at the end of the day, I don't want a world in which we say, cops, you have guns, but we trust you to do your best. You make your decision. I want there to be objective standards that are set about when police violence is justified and when it is not. I think almost never justified, but you know the point. In the same kind of way, and again, the movies didn't really highlight this, and they changed the question in a way that frustrated me, because I do think the Sokovia Accords that we wind up getting are not this. Right. But when I watch Civil War, I do want there to be some kind of a Sokovia Accord, because, I look at Cap's training Scarlet Witch. And, the incident that happened largely has to do with, was Scarlet Witch properly trained in how to deal with difficult situations in the field? And for anyone who hasn't seen it, basically it's like she's attempting to prevent one disaster, and she winds up causing another one. There is a very good argument to be made that what she did was basically like harm reduction, and that she caused the deaths of 20 people instead of 2,000 or 200. There's another argument to be made that says that no, either A, that wasn't her place to make that decision, or B, there would have been a third option. Right. But at the end of the day, I don't trust her to make that decision. I don't trust Cap to make that decision. I want there to be some nothing's really clearly objective, as we were talking about earlier, but some kind of body that is attempting to be objective, that more importantly also has a written down set of a code of behavior that they're supposed to follow. And maybe I put too much trust in things like written down rules and laws over gut feelings. But I think with all this stuff, that's at the end what I want, I feel like the problem with people with powers is that they so fundamentally break the rules of humanity. And so it feels like all of the normal laws and standards and guidelines don't apply to them. So what I most want is just for a democratic process that involves everybody, that comes up with a new set of standards that handles those people.
Yeah, and I understand where you're coming from there. I think that it is unreasonable to expect every decision to be evaluated against such a standard. There are always going to be situations where, especially if you're an action hero, right, in these universes, where you need to make an instantaneous judgment call, and there is no guideline established, and you don't have time to put it forward to a committee because inaction in and of itself causes harm.
Sure.
Right? And so some action is better than inaction possibly. Right?
Well, let me use that model, though. Right now, and granted, you and I are both very critical of the current cop situation, but even in a situation where we had a just police system, there's going to be an understanding that there are going to be very good guidelines and rules that help teach cops when they should use force and when they shouldn't. But still, there's an understanding that the police officer is going to have to trust their discernment, their split-second judgment, as you're saying in the moment. But that because they're a police officer, they are officially licensed representative of the state, and therefore the state gets to regulate them.
Right.
Do you think there should be people with supernatural powers doing justice who aren't... Like, do you think that all of them should be regulated by the state in some way? Or do you think that is too much?
In order for it to be legal, I think that's only fair. Right? The thing is, like, if we shouldn't hold them to a different standard than we hold you or I. If I go out and with similar means to what the police have, right? I go out with my own set of firearms and fight crime and stop crime, right? I am a criminal,
right,
for doing that. I don't think having powers changes that calculus at all. In fact, I think that it makes it more important that we make sure that if you're intending to do these things, that it is either state sanctioned, right? Because that is the role of the role of a government in that situation. The role of enforcers in that situation is to enforce legality. If you're not authorized effectively by the people, because it comes from an elected position who gets this power.
In theory.
Right? In theory. Right? We could talk for a very long time about how that system works. But at the end of the day, enforcement and execution of enforcement of the law is under the purview of our socialized government. And if you've got people operating outside of that, powers or no, we have to treat them the same way. And if it's no powers, we would treat them as criminal. I don't see how we wouldn't treat them as criminal if they had powers.
And I think, it's important to name, I agree with you on that in theory. The reality is 90% of our heroes in these stories are vigilantes.
Yep.
Because they're often for that to work, the state has to be fundamentally sound on some level. And I don't think it is fundamentally sound in our own real world. I don't think it's certainly not fundamentally sound in all these other worlds. And I think this is why, and I think this is part of the topic. It's interesting how we're kind of wandering somewhat. But I think this is actually a point that is very important to me. I enjoy a good vigilante story because I do think that's one of the hardest ethical decisions is when to say, even though this is wrong, this is illegal, I need to be a vigilante. I need to do something because the state is failing. And I think that is it's funny, and it sounds like I'm taking this both ways. I'm not trying to, but I sort of am. I agree with you that should always be an illegal act, but that I do think also that sometimes the most moral act is to disobey an unjust law. And where I'm going with that, though, is that I think it's not coincidence that my favorite stories are ones where, I think you get a character like the Punisher, who just says, you know what, I know what's right, and anyone who thinks I'm wrong is stupid, and so I am totally morally justified in being a vigilante. That's my least favorite. My favorite is Batman and Daredevil, because both of them hate the fact that they have to be vigilantes, at least on some level. And as we talked about, sometimes they like it more than they want to.
Right.
But both of them, I think, agree with us that being a vigilante shouldn't be a good thing and shouldn't be a real thing, and shouldn't be a legal thing, but that they live in such a broken society that it's necessary.
Or rather, that they think it's necessary.
That they think it's necessary,
right.
and that hopefully they have someone else that they're asking, and it's part of why The Dark Knight is probably still, that or Logan are my favorite movies of any of these stories, because as I see it, that's the fundamental question of The Dark Knight: is Bruce Wayne, Batman, is trying to figure out what can he do so that society doesn't need him anymore.
Right.
And I think that's another really interesting way of looking at that power is, how do you not say to yourself, how do I keep this power? But how do you say, I'm in a situation where I shouldn't have to have this responsibility. How can I use my power so that I no longer do?
I come from a slightly different position. I enjoy the vigilante justice stories. Don't get me wrong; they're good stories. They're fun. There is an element of power fantasy there that I find very uncomfortable, and always have, because I like to examine my positions on things and try to think, if I didn't trust myself, how would I feel about my position?
Right.
And I often come away from those situations and from evaluating characters like Daredevil being like, he has changed Matt Murdock's moral compass just a hair to the left, and suddenly he's a villain.
Yeah.
Right? And like, look at how I responded to the first part of Daredevil season 3. I actually straight up was saying, no, Matt Murdock's a villain this season. It's really weird. Because of how he was behaving.
Well, I think a lot of it comes down to what you just said about, do I trust myself? Because, and I've said this a bunch, we both said this, but for me it was a big part of my feelings about Daredevil. I think it's not coincidence that Daredevil season 2 is both my least favorite season of Daredevil, and it's also the season in which he spends the least time being accountable to others. Because he is just trusting himself. And that's why the Tony Stark argument in Civil War makes so much sense to me, because Tony Stark is saying, look, I did trust myself. I thought I was doing the right thing and the good thing when I built Ultron. And look at how terribly that went.
And that's the whole, right, that's the big conversation, is that when you have power, right, it's important that there be accountability and that there be mechanisms in place to ensure that accountability is active and is not solely within your own control.
Right.
Right? And some stories accomplish this in ways that are themselves problematic. You could argue the entire foundation of the Psi Corps is all about holding telepaths accountable. Because the only person that can police a telepath, the only person that can tell the telepaths are doing something they are not supposed to, is another telepath.
Right. Well, and in that same regard, like, at the end of the day, unless they can get their hands on kryptonite, the only one who can really tell Superman if he's doing something wrong is Wonder Woman, because she's the only one who can, or some combination of other superheroes. We can debate into who's most powerful. It's also why I think, and kind of getting us back to the original question, I think at the end of the day, some kind of a balance of power between different groups becomes so important. And I don't want to just keep this metaphor going, but I think it's a very helpful one. If we think about, because most superhero stories are about them using their powers to stop evildoers, to stop criminals, to stop threats. To some extent, on some level, we're always talking about superheroes playing either a police or a military function. And one of the things that I know in those worlds has become so important is the civilian review board. Is the idea that you don't just let cops police themselves. You don't just let the military police themselves. You have to have outsiders, the people who don't have that power, being part of what holds them accountable.
Yeah.
And I think that's, again, why, and again, she's often portrayed as a villain, I think with good reason, but Amanda Waller is so often one of my favorite characters because she is very much on the side of, we, the non-powered people, should get to have some degree of holding you in check. And again, that can get very dangerous too, because then that can get, so let's just have a nice, happy list of all of you. Or it can be, let's build the Sentinels that will keep track of it. It's all of these questions. I think the reason why they're such good questions is we're trying to find the razor-thin, safe area, knowing that going too far in either direction becomes really problematic.
Right. And it gets to the point, right, where you end up with the situation with the Sentinels. Like, mutants basically are illegal in that particular universe, right? And they just need to be contained according to the people in power, in political power. Again, there's two different forms of power that we're talking about here, and they're sometimes at odds,
right?
Which is honestly less troubling than when they're both in the same place, but they each have their problems. And the big problem with when they're at odds is when it becomes more important to control the potential threats, the potential for bad, than it does to respect the sanctity of an individual's freedom.
Right.
Right? Which is why the psych horror can be a problem. Right? And why we have the whole Sentinels rounding up the mutants business is just worlds of bad.
Mm-hmm.
It's never been portrayed as a positive thing in any of the fiction.
What do you think is in one of our fictional stories, where do you think there is a good example of a balance being struck where the powered and the non-powered are getting along in a somewhat equitable, healthy relationship?
I mean, usually that doesn't make for good stories, so that's not very common. Boy, that's a hard question. I'm sure there, like, funnily enough, the very first one that popped into my head was actually My Little Pony: Friendship is Magic.
Okay. I'll admit that's not a world which I am familiar with, which I take no shame in on either side. But so tell me more about Friendship is Magic.
So, like, to very, very broadly summarize, there are unicorns, Pegasus, and Earth ponies, right?
Okay.
In the world, and so the unicorns and the Pegasus seem to have more, like, power, because the unicorns have actual magic that they can use with their horns.
Right.
And the Pegasus can literally fly, right? But there's not been a plot line where there's tension because the Earth ponies can't do any of those things. They're still valued in their society and they have a place, right? And so part of it is probably because it's a children's show and they don't want to go there, but it is the first example I can think of where it's like, oh, everyone's just getting along. But that's the whole freaking point of the show, is it's about, respecting each other's differences and celebrating each other rather than highlighting and dividing, right? While I was doing that, there's the first series of Avatar: The Last Airbender, other than, like, it was far more about one government abusing power than it was about any of the individual benders abusing power, right? And they're, like, the benders were seen as, like, people within their society who are highly valued, who have a place, and their place was to help protect their people from the invading forces, from the military of the bad guys.
Right. But yeah, it's not seen as being overpowering in that regard.
Right, exactly. It's not until horror where we actually get any kind of narrative about how okay, well, we're at peace basically. So now why does the power dynamic appear to be so much in favor of the vendors?
I think those are good examples, and I would actually bring in. I've talked about it. It's kind of a negative thing, but I actually think that the examples I've used are about ways this particular world gets to a fairly equitable place, which is, I do think that the DC Justice League world is better at this, and that there is, as you and I have talked about, Superman and them are often very clear about how they defer to civilian authority, and there are questions raised about what are the methods of the civilian authority and what are the methods of the heroes, and there's tension there. But there is a clear kind of understanding of here's how we're going to try to interrelate.
Right.
Yeah, because I think you're right. There's not very many, in part because you're right, it doesn't make good storytelling. And I'll say, I do think also that there are times when I think the author thinks that it's a better situation than it is.
Yeah, for sure.
And I will say, like, again, to me, that's I don't know if it's true yet, so no spoilers, because that's my concern about Korra, is that the writer wants it to be a better situation than it is. Certainly, I think, although later writers have acknowledged that was one of the problems with some of the Star Wars stories, is that I think, because to me, the Jedi are a perfect example of what we're talking about here, of people who absolutely set themselves apart and set themselves above and think they are better than everyone else. Professor X, I think, is another one where, on a very early episode of this podcast, a friend of mine named Professor Greg Haley came on, and we did an episode specifically about how we thought Professor X is one of the biggest villains of comic books, because he's someone who is constantly deciding what he thinks is right and what is best for people and making those decisions without any input from them. He is, until some very recent versions, almost always portrayed as a hero. But he, to me, is an example where I think the author doesn't realize how problematic the use of the power is there.
I mean, I feel and that's all I'm going to say on the matter. I feel that they wouldn't have put the narrative in the first season if they weren't aware of it. But
in Legend of Korra.
In Legend of Korra,
And, like I said, we'll see how that one
right.
plays out. I want to just using an example of my thought process.
Right. But yeah, I understand the concern, and I understand because I think you could walk away from a lot of forms of media with that idea, right? Like you could walk away from Babylon 5 thinking that Straczynski thinks that the way the Psych Wars shook out is exactly the way it's supposed to go, right? I don't think that. I think it's very realistic.
Yeah.
I think it was a very telling portrayal and a little bit cynical, but I feel more realistic than cynical on how a situation like that would shake out if telepaths spontaneously appeared in our world. And like the X-Men stories are among the better for really making that question. Because it's funny when you look at Superman, who, his power's innate and he's an outsider. Superman being the ultimate immigrant story, right? And you look at how we portray that character in our media and the conflicts that we give him versus the conflicts of the X-Men. And the only difference is the X-Men were once at some point in their timeline usually normal people who then spontaneously got powers, usually around puberty.
Right.
And now suddenly are being treated by society completely differently. There's a very strong metaphor there.
Yeah.
And one that does not go unnoticed, and they've been doing a good job of sort of adapting it with the times. But I find it interesting that when we treat the narratives that we tell, the stories that we tell, treat people who were not powered and then became powered differently than people who were always that way.
And I'll admit, and I think you make a very good point there, because part of the idea is, at the end of the day, how much do you or do you not see yourself as still part of the same world as everybody else?
Right.
Are you a human who has mutated and has powers, or are you a mutant?
Right.
And this is one area in which I've also, again, thought Professor X and the X-Men, of course. Yeah, that's the group. One of the real failings, or one of the real contradictions, is he wants to say, we are still human, we are still like you, we have these powers, but we are not needing to be separate and different. But then what he does is takes all these people at a young age and has them not live in normal society, but live in a society completely surrounded by their mutants.
Mm-hmm.
And he does that for very good reason, because as he points out, it is not safe for these children to be with normal children. Again, they're the problem. Normal versus mutant. That language itself is ridiculously pejorative. But non-mutant versus the otherizing that happens here is so, and yet a person with mutated powers just sounds so awful.
Well, I mean, you can't not name it, right? Like that's the thing. You can't. When somebody can do something that nobody else around them can do, and it's like, nor do they ever have the ability to develop that. Like, you have to have a name with that, and you can't not make that distinction. It's very important.
And here is where, and you and I talked about this a bit as we were getting ready for this, I don't think this is a problem necessarily, but I think it's an important thing to name when you're looking at the distinctions between powered and unpowered people, or mutants or non-mutants, or any of those, as a metaphor for other distinctions in our world. Which is that, race is a social construct that, as a social construct, today has fundamental power and meaning and identity. But in a biological human capacity standpoint, race isn't really a biological thing that exists, and it certainly doesn't have a huge effect on that. Gender, yes, there are ways in which, in very broad strokes, with very broad generalities, gender-related sexual characteristics, I don't know the scientific term, you know what I mean?
Secondary sex characteristics.
Secondary sex characteristics and the like, can have an effect on the average range of people who are thought of, as having the secondary sex characteristics of male or female. There's going to be generalized differences in terms of weight and strength and size and things like that. But that on an individual level, those things are meaningless. There's very possible to have women who are going to be, strongest than 90% of men, and vice versa. Not to mention just that gender becomes so much more complicated than we think it is. Same is true for orientation, for some of these other things. These are very real differences, but they don't fundamentally change the fact of us all being human and us all sharing a common humanity. As I think the X-Men and some other shows do a good job of pointing out, that's in some ways where the metaphor breaks down, because, yeah, I would say a fundamental part of the human condition is that I have a need to communicate with other humans through speech or touch or nonverbal communication, because I'm not able to read your mind.
Mm-hmm.
And so to say a person who is fundamentally able to read the minds of others, not that they're not human in a judgmental way, but that they are now, the differences between powered and non-powered people are very real and very tangible, in a way that I think a lot of our social discussion about race and gender and all these things, as it should be, is saying, look, these differences don't matter. I mean, they matter in terms of cultural identity, but there's no difference in intelligence. There's no difference in strength. There's no difference in physical or mental or intellectual capability based on where in the world someone was born and to what kind of parentage. But there is being a mutant, And so do you see what I'm saying? That I think that it's a way in which it's a very powerful metaphor, but it's also a different kind of situation.
Yeah, for sure. Because when you these entities are presented to us as different to the point where they are not. We can't envision them as humans because we don't know humans who can do that. Right. I don't know a human who has to keep their eyes shut all the time, or behind some weird ruby quartz nonsense, or lasers come out. Like, I don't know Cyclops, right?
And it's funny because even as I say that, and as you say it, I have this odd habit, unfortunately, that must drive Jacob crazy, where I will say something I think I agree with, and then Jacob restates what I said, agreeing with me, and I realize, no, I don't actually agree with it. But
it's on purpose. It's 100% on purpose when I restate.
It's also known as, or I'm trying to set up Jacob as the fall guy. But either way, I it's more that I want to add a caveat, which is that, because I think the way you phrased it is so perfect, it gets to both the truth of what I'm saying and the flaw in it, which is, at the end of the day, is my not defining a human as a person who can shoot lasers out of their eyes because there's some objective definition of humanity, or because I'm a person of limited experience. And again, look at the metaphor, because it is certainly very possible that has happened in broad numbers in history, and certainly still happens today, that a person defines humanity as having light skin, or defines humanity as having sexual attraction to a person of the other gender in a perfect binary gender system. And someone can say, well, I've never met another person, so they seem non-human. So I just kind of wanted to name that as I said that, because I think it's one more way in which this is such an interesting question, because it comes down to, can we even ever say that there is a objective idea of this is what humanity is, and now a person has mutated beyond that, versus is this a question of we have to continually keep expanding our definition of what is humanity?
I mean, Magneto would argue yes. Yeah. Magneto goes around calling mutants Homo superior, which is a very loaded term.
Yeah.
But like that's tricky, because is the ability, like, if a bunch of people spontaneously develop the capacity for sending, like, not even reading minds, just transmitting their thoughts to others through a means other than the forms we use to communicate now, are they still human? Right? Or, like, do we adjust our definition of human to be like, and some humans can do this now, apparently?
Right.
Or do we say, you know what, no, you appear to have gone beyond what we consider the standard human experience to be. The important thing there, the important distinction there, is not to define them as subhuman, right?
Or to define yourselves as subhuman.
Right,
Either way.
Right. Is to not say, is when you're drawing the difference, right? Whether you say these are human and these are no longer human, is not creating a system where one is more valuable than another, right? That at some point, sentient life matters, right? And that's what we care about, right? Or sometimes just life matters, depending on your perspective. I know Paul and I could probably go many rounds on that particular topic.
And that's actually a perfect example, because this is one where I really wish Paul was part of this conversation, because one of the things that Magneto does, and actually, I'm even going to bring up another moral situation, which we're shooting to have a guest, another good friend of ours, Meg Baum, on to discuss moral systems in gaming. And I know one of the ones she wants to talk about is the morality system in the Vampire the Masquerade role-playing game. And here they get into a very interesting idea, very similar to what you're talking about. The whole game is based on people being vampires. And there are some vampires who think of themselves as kind of humans plus. They are humans, but they have these extra abilities and these extra limitations because they're vampires now, but that they still hold a moral responsibility towards other humans. There's another group of vampires, the Sabbat, who are one of the reasons I love the Vampire the Masquerade game so much is there's never a clear good guy or bad guy. Every faction gets to tell its own morality from its own perspective. They are very similar to Magneto. They see themselves as Homo Vampirus. They are a further evolution of the human race, and that they now don't hold humanity on the same moral level that they hold the vampires.
Mm-hmm.
At first blush, that sounds horrifying until you realize every person except the most extreme vegan does the exact same thing already. I place higher moral value on the life of a human than I do on the life of a cow. And I yell at me for that, and I certainly think that, and in the vampire game, the way they portray it is there are some people who act like we love the cattle, the humans. We want to take care of them. We want to nurture them. We want to have, farm-raised humans and that kind of thing. All the way
free-range humans.
Yeah, all the way to those who are outrightly sadistic and want to torture these animals the way some people today, like dogfighting in ways that are, I think, morally repugnant and horrifying. And the point is, I just love that because it's a good way of reminding us, like, it's very easy for us to think, like, oh, we would never make moral distinctions between life forms. Because we think all humans, all sapient life forms are on the exact same level. The reality is that's not true. We make, drawing the mental distinction between a human and a dolphin or a chimpanzee is not as clear as it would seem. And I would imagine that, in a world where you have, like, a Professor X level of human intelligence, the line between Professor X's intelligence or sentience and a normal humans and a chimpanzees, I don't know which one of those would be a bigger gap, Right. And I think that it raises really good questions for us. And even in our own world, there's a much smaller minority than, like, when it is with we're powered, unpowered. But we do live in a world where there is a great degree of neurological and developmental difference. And 100 years ago, that was 100% seen as people who were developmentally disabled or autistic or the like were thought of as subhuman. And that is a horrible, horrific idea that we are rejecting entirely. And yet still, by some people's definitions of sentience, people with very severe issues of developmental disability may not fit.
You say we're backpedaling from it, but there's a section of our population that believes that it is more important to disregard the science behind herd immunity than it is for their child to potentially maybe ever be autistic.
Correct. Yeah.
So I have very strong opinions about that. That's a different topic, but
yeah,
autism is not a problem.
Yeah, fully 100.
I mean, it's okay, that's a very loaded statement I just made, but like what I mean is that treating your child getting autism as something worse than them potentially dying is horrific.
Yes.
Yeah,
you and I are two, by many definitions, neurotypical people who I think neither one of us is qualified to talk on that, but I think it's very clear that what we're saying is a person with autism may define how their experience however they wish, but for the rest of us to define that as not a fully human experience in any way is horrific and wrong. Yeah. But I think that's the way in which these stories are metaphors for our own, because that happened,
Yes.
100 years ago, it was accepted human science that a non-European was an inferior moral and intellectual being. And that certainly is still held by, some of the truck stops you and I are passing right now on this drive will hold T-shirts that clearly describe President Obama in those kind of terms. That these ideas are still alive and well.
Right.
as we expected, we've wandered onto a bunch of different things, and still yet I think only covered one of the main questions we wanted to cover. But we've already passed an hour. Are there any other kind of one or two more big questions you want us to dive into?
So I think that when you're dealing with a society that has powered individuals, some of the more fascinating stories I've found are ones where the powered individuals are more or less fully integrated into society, but are...
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
That was the point I was trying to make before we got on a tangent about Professor X. So I'm agreeing with you. Go on.
Right. So like, in our show notes, what I wrote down was the Mistborn trilogy as an example of this, where you have, not to summarize the entire plot of the books, but basically you have metal magicians, metal wizards. You have metal wizards who can do a specific kind of thing with metal, and it does cool stuff. And there are different types of metal wizards, and the metal wizards within that society mostly come from the nobility, but not all of them. And the way that society is built, those individuals aren't like, they're not the leaders, but there's not nothing makes their actions illegal. They're just people who can do things that other people can't. Just like, if I were to, I'm trying to think of a good metaphor for this that is like real life. Like if I have a car, right, and for some reason nobody else can have a car, and like then I'm a taxi driver, I'm an Uber driver for the city or whatever, right? That's basically how they appear to handle it. It's like, oh, you can do this thing that nobody else can do, so that's going to be your, like, you get to leverage your career in that way, but otherwise they're not treated any differently.
Right.
And so I think that's fascinating. And then you end up with, like, obviously the plot of those books has nothing to do with that, which is an interesting societal construct.
Right. Go ahead.
But there's this, it's less common because when your powered people are more or less fully integrated, that can't be your source of conflict. And so it's not really showcased.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, and I think part of the problem also becomes, in the sort of egalitarian fantasy, the way that works is, you have a car, but I have farming equipment, and someone else has an x-ray machine, and then we all have something we can contribute, and part of the problem becomes, do you need to be a police person in a world where Superman and Wonder Woman exist? Like, that there's some limit on how do you find a way to contribute. And one thing I do think is interesting is that a lot of these stories, the egalitarian kind of integration that you are talking about, does exist within the mutant populations themselves. Mm-hmm. Because if you think about it, like, people always like to sort of laugh and talk about superhero team-up movies, like, who's the more or less OP, Mm-hmm. Like, Black Widow and Hawkeye are pretty low on the power list compared to most of the rest of the Avengers, and, like, I don't know the X-Men well enough, but I know I've certainly walked away thinking, like, some of those X-Men have powers that are much greater than some of the others. And some of the stories reflect that, but often there is, at least within the X-Men worlds, an idea of, you can shoot lasers, and I can read minds, and you can control the weather. And we're not saying all those things are equal, but we're saying that we're all different, and that's okay, and that we're each able to do our own thing. Right. And I think what gets harder is a world in which to say, you have all these powers and I don't, we're still equal in some way. Because to do that, you have to create a system where your having powers makes you deficient in some other way that I, as a, quote, normal person, can make up for. Right. Which doesn't really often make narrative sense.
Right. And I mean, the fact that the X-Men don't eventually end up, like, forming a hierarchy based on the magnitude of their power capabilities is really kind of heartwarming in a way. And same with the Brotherhood of the evil Brotherhood of Mutants, or whatever you want to call it. Right. It's just like, no, we're all people who agree about something, and we all have some way to contribute. Some people contribute differently than others, like Wolverine can't be killed ever, I guess.
Yeah.
Professor Xavier is very, very good at controlling people's minds. Jean Grey is incredibly powerful, and just does all kinds of cool crap with telekinesis, and also telepathy, and also matter shaping. And Jean Grey is incredibly powerful.
Yeah.
And Cyclops can shoot lasers from his eyes. They're all the same, basically.
Well, now that I've said that, once again, I'm going to disagree with myself for you. But because I think, my point was that, and I think your point, those societies are mostly egalitarian and mostly non-hierarchical. Except that in both cases, there's one person who's clearly far above either. And actually, it makes me wonder: is there ever a story in either the X-Men or the Brotherhood where there is some delineation of where Professor X or where Magneto gets their authority? Like, is he ever reelected as head of the X-Men or as head of the
I mean, he's headmaster of the school, and so like they get indoctrinated into that philosophy at a very early age.
Right.
There's hero worship all up ins, right?
Yeah.
I think that it is a self-perpetuating system, more so than it is that he ever took a vote of faith or a vote of confidence from his his mutants.
So in that case, it's not that he's more powerful than everyone else; it's that he's much more of a manipulative bastard than everybody else.
And in Magneto's case, he's a survivor, right?
Yeah.
Like there's one point I forget. Like I think it's in one of the X-Men movies from the 90s, or was that the early 2000s? Whatever. When the evil mutants, the Magneto's people were all like getting tattoos to show solidarity, and they're all like, "Hey, Magneto, when are you going to get one?" And Magneto's like, "I've already gotten one, and no ink's ever going to touch this skin ever again."
Right. He's talking about the one he got in the concentration camp.
Yes, exactly. It's like, oh, that's such a good moment. It's such a good scene for the character of Eric Lanford.
Yeah.
Eric's one of my favorite characters in the X-Men series.
Mine as well.
I don't remember there being a story like that. It's funny though, because thinking about the systems of hierarchy among powered people reminds me of one of my more favorite anime in recent years that obviously you've not seen, so I'm not going to go super deep on it. But there's a show called Guilty Crown, wherein at one point there are people who have different powers that their leader can draw out of them, and then he can give them to them to then use. And they end up forming a hierarchy around the perceived efficacy and usefulness of those people's powers.
Oh, interesting.
And it creates a society where some people are less valued than others, a sort of micro-society where people are less valued than others. And sure enough, the people who feel less valued decide to try to do things to prove they're more capable than they're being portrayed, and it causes problems. It's a great story.
Well, and that alone, granted here, my economic analysis is going to come up, but to me, depending on how that story is told, you could see that as such a wonderful critique of capitalism.
Oh, yeah.
Because, and I think this is, sometimes you get stories about people with powers where it quickly becomes, how can you make your power financially useful to others?
Right.
And it's the same of like, great power comes great responsibility. Do you have a need to find social value or social good for the power you have? On the one hand, you can view that as a responsibility thing. On the one hand, you can totally view that as a capitalist thing.
Yep.
I think Hancock is the name of the movie.
The Will Smith movie?
Yeah, where Will Smith is playing a person who's got these powers, and he has just no desire to use them to help anybody.
Yep.
And there's ways I like that story. I think it went off the rails in some ways, but I think I found him a much more sympathetic character than I think I was supposed to when I watched that movie, because I think there is an even question there of, do you have, we'll come back to, what is your level to find a way to be useful to society with your powers? And because I guess to me there's a difference between, if there's something really dangerous happening in the society and you could stop it and you choose not to, I think there's a moral problem there. But if it's you could use your skills to be socially beneficial and you choose not to, that to me, again, it's that individual versus community thing, of like, right. Do you actually have a responsibility to sacrifice yourself in some way for the larger good?
I going back like 2 sentences, I actually think I disagree with you somewhat on the point of, even if there is something like very terrible happening around you and you have the power to stop it, I think that it is morally good for you to do that. I feel like choosing not to do it, I don't know. I think it's ethically charged. I think it's ethically problematic. I'm not sure that I'm going to sit there and say it's morally wrong to do that.
I think you're right. I can't make a blanket statement it's morally wrong. I think I'd be very curious and very suspicious of the morality involved.
Right.
And very, a person would have to work hard to meet. Like, I do kind of feel like, you're crossing the street, you see a person fall down, and there's an onrushing car, you decide, if you're terrified, if you had been in an auto accident yourself, and you are terrified, and that stopped you from rushing to that person's aid, I don't think there's a moral failing. if you look at the fact that someone else is about to die and just think, no big deal, and don't rush to their aid, yes, I see that as a moral failing. And those are two extreme examples, and you're right, finding the line between them, there's a lot of gray area.
Right.
But
I guess, where I draw the line is that if your system of morality is compelling someone to sacrifice themselves for the benefit of, sacrifice their livelihood, their well-being, for the benefit of others, I don't like it.
Right, well, that's the word of the sacrifice. And that's what I like. The situation of, can I do this without great personal harm to myself?
Right. I would argue in the onrushing car case, you can't make that claim that you can do it without great personal potential harm to yourself. But, given sufficient time, given the right circumstances, yeah. And now it's all like, if you choose to do nothing, yeah. Like, why? I want to know why. Do you not care about other people? Right? But,
And I guess, what you just said there is the most important, and this might sound like a word game, but I think from an ethical analysis point, it's very important. I think there's a difference between saying, I am going to morally judge you if you don't rush to someone's aid. I have a problem there. I think a different way I would approach it is to say, I think that a person with a well-formed moral standpoint would see potential human suffering as a bad thing that they feel at least some desire to overcome if they could.
Sure.
And I will admit, morally judgmental of people who are able to look at moral suffering that is in some regard due to their actions or due to their interactions and not be bothered by it. And this is, again, not to get off of my own politics, but sometimes I get into arguments with people about there being billionaires. And it's not that, my issue is, it's not that I think there's some monetary number above which you become morally evil. It's that I fundamentally don't understand how at some point you're getting enough pleasure by having that much wealth that it makes you okay with the fact that you having that much wealth means that many people don't have anything.
Right.
And again, not to get into that specific political issue, but I think it's a good example of what we're talking about at what point are you so unconcerned with the suffering of others that sitting and finishing your bagel is more important to you than rushing out and trying to help someone?
Right. And that's, again, it calls back to the very first question of power, people who have it, and what role do they play in the positions where their power is useful. Right? In the case of the onrushing car, it's just, do I have the capability of getting that person in the street out of the way before the car could potentially harm either of us? If so, 100% agree. The correct thing to do is to intervene. And if you don't do anything, I don't think you made the right decision.
And you're also right that you haven't said this, but I think it's part of what you're implying. There is something very dangerous about being the person who wasn't there, who could then look back later and say, I believe that you could have done it without putting yourself in danger. And
right.
It's one of the things, again, that I think some of the, we've talked about these before, but the Elijah Wood Spider-Man movies, I think did a really interesting job of...
Elijah Wood?
Wasn't he the first?
Who
am I thinking of?
No, you're thinking of, that's not Elijah Wood. Oh my goodness, now that you've said that, I can't remember. The one who was in the Spider-Man where Alfred Molina was Doc Ock, right?
Right.
You're thinking about him.
With Willem Dafoe and...
Yeah, as Green Goblin in the first one.
Oh my god, why can't we not place this?
And
I can't even look it up on my phone, so we're recording on our phone. Anyway, we will, we'll figure it out later.
It's 100% not Elijah Wood, and I had it on the tip of my tongue earlier when we were talking about it.
But in those Spider-Man movies, he wrestles with that a lot, because there's some real questions asked about to what extent is he allowed to go have his own life. And the second Spider-Man movie, the second Superman movie, I have a lot of problems with how it's presented, but I do think this is one thing that movie gets right. And for anyone, this is the second Christopher Reeve movie.
Right.
I grew up with those. I love those. They're very old, so a lot of our listeners may not know them. But the conceit is that he basically realizes that he cannot have a normal life and he cannot love Lois Lane if he is Superman. And so he goes to the Fortress of Solitude and finds a way to use the Kryptonian technology to remove his powers and allow him to lead a normal human life. And then what happens later is terrible things start happening to the world, and in part that he's kind of morally responsible for it, not really, but he's morally connected to. It's the criminals from Krypton, Zod, and all that. And he goes through this crisis of thinking, is it right that I am the only one who could have had the power to do this, and I chose to give up that power? And he decides that he needs to take that power back. And again, it's not handled perfectly. There's a lot of ways in which I didn't like the way it was handled, but I thought it was an interesting way of exploring the question, but B, it is kind of the exception that proves the rule, because Superman is true of a hubris that I think most of us fall into. And the hubris is, it's very easy to fall into thinking, if I don't fix this, no one else will, because only I can.
Right.
And the truth is, that is true for Superman. It's not true for most of us. And it's something I know I saw in the nonprofit world all the time. You need to be able to check your ego a little bit to be able to say, you know what, if I can't save this person, maybe somebody else can, and maybe that's okay.
Right. Tobey
Maguire.
Thank you.
We got it.
We got there. I was like, I got Toby. Not remember his last name for the life of me. We did it. All right. Anyway, yeah. I also grew up on the Christopher Reeve Superman movies because I am a very old. Gene Hackman was my first Lex Luthor.
Yes, agree.
Only a little bit. Hackman was an interesting Luthor, but like those stories were fundamentally different from the Superman stories they're telling today.
Yeah.
Right. But I did really like the triad of Kryptonians that came in to shake things up in that whole storyline. This is also during a time where Superman's like trying to just integrate.
Yeah.
Right? And that's the storyline where he chooses to try to give up his power so that he can just be like everybody else.
He can love Lois Lane, he can work at the Daily Planet, he can have that normal life.
Right, he can have the life that he's wanted since he came to. It's very interesting story when you think about the metaphor that Superman is, where he's just trying to integrate with the people around him by giving away his extra power.
Right.
Like, that is an amazing heroic thing to do, where you're all like, you know what? Nobody should have this. I'm going to get rid of it so I can be like everybody else. But then he turns out thinking that, no, I have to do this because nobody else can beat Zod.
Right.
Right? You will kneel before Zod, and then you will do leg lifts before Zod.
All of that.
Yeah.
We're getting close to the hour and a half mark, so I do want us to wrap up.
Yeah, we should.
I think the one last thing I wanted to touch on, and we've touched on this a bunch already in other podcasts, in other episodes, but I just want to reiterate it, is I think anytime you have a situation of some people having drastically different powers than other people, for me, the thing that is at the end of the day going to decide how healthy or how broken is the situation is how much fear is there on both sides.
Right.
And I think it's part of where, Babylon 5 is a perfect example of this, because as you said there's no chicken and the egg. Like, it's hard to say, was humanity more afraid or was telepaths more afraid? They both have legitimate fears. In my favorite tellings of the X-Men, on the one hand, you could say Magneto is, too driven by fear, and he is too afraid, and he's too much allowing that to control him. But you also get a lot of evidence that his fears are justified.
And in the end, Magneto is proven right in every X-Men story I've read.
Part of why I love Logan so much is that at the end of Logan, Professor X was wrong. Like, humanity turns on the mutants in the way that Eric always predicted.
Yep.
And I think that's, and to take it back to the Justice League a little bit, part of what Batman and Amanda Waller are the characters who are still very afraid. And at some level, they have right to be afraid, and they should be afraid. But most of the rest of humanity has come to terms with not being afraid, and that's part of why that is a somewhat more peaceful situation. So, and I think, again, that's a very powerful metaphor. Like, look at the people who are able to incite people to violence and to hatred of immigrants and of gay people and of anyone who's different. It's almost always they use fear, and I in some ways I think maybe that's one of the most powerful parts of the metaphor of these stories, is the way it lifts up. the way that the danger of being afraid of difference and the way that that fear can be translated into resentment and anger and fear and hatred and all the rest.
And used as a tool to manipulate them.
Yeah.
Right? Our fears, fear is a very natural response to the unknown. And the overwhelming narrative in many of these stories is that your fear, when properly channeled, is a good thing, but when manipulated, when used as a tool to influence you, can bring out the worst in us.
Yeah.
And I think it's a good cautionary tale to remember that, when you're evaluating yourself, and you can use I forget what conversation we were having where we were comparing a dichotomy to parents and children.
Yeah.
Do you remember the context for that topic? But it was the idea where your parents, when you're a child, your parents have a ton of power over you,
right?
And you can in some ways fear them, and so some I say misguided parents will use that fear to help control their children,
right?
But that actually just creates problems later on, and so it's natural to be afraid of people who are more powerful than you, and so that's why when you have power over people, part of your responsibility, I feel, is to help mitigate those fears.
Yes. Right?
And when you are the other person, part of that is to really challenge your fears and say, is this a real fear? Is this really a possibility? Or am I just living in the world of analyzing unknown unknowns and just literally fearing the worst?
Right. Well, I think there's a couple things there. One is it goes back again to the Batman story that I keep talking about how much I love so much, The Dark Knight, and that the Christopher Nolan duology, because I hate Dark Knight Rises so much. But what I think those movies get so well is this, that Batman, the way a good parent should be raising a child to not need the parent eventually, that Batman wants to build up Harvey Dent and wants to build up Jim Gordon to the point where they don't need Batman anymore. And that, to some extent, I've always felt like at the end of that movie, Joker wins because he proves that that's not the case. The irony there being, of course, that Batman uses fear to mobilize people and all the problems thereof. I also, though, I want to highlight, in this movie with kind of our closing words, to me, one of the most important things you said in all that is when you said that it's the fear of difference. Because I keep going back to what I was saying before, where I think I was mistaken of the definitions of humanity and all that. That at the end of the day, the thing is, what we're finding difference, and we're finding things that surprise us and things that are outside of our this is what a person should be, this is what a man should be, this is what a human should be, this is what an earthling should be. And what I hope the stories can remind us is to constantly challenge that and to constantly push ourselves to go further, to say, wait a minute, this is different, this is outside of my bounds, this doesn't fit into my well-established structure, but maybe that's okay, and maybe I can find a way to make, to change my structure to allow this new thing to fit, instead of just saying this thing is wrong because it doesn't fit.
Yeah.
So
I agree. As we're closing out, I wanted to take the opportunity to, as always, thank our good friend Jack.
Yep.
Wrote our music. So Jack, if I'm pronouncing your last name wrong, please tell me. you have my number. Jack Hess?
I believe that is correct. Yeah.
All right. If it's not, please let me know. Names are important.
Yeah.
And we really, really appreciate the music you wrote for us. So thank you so much for that, Jack.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jack. Thank you to all of you, all the listeners. Thank you to, we've been getting more and more people who are writing in, who are supporting us, who are sending us questions and ideas. And just, we're so grateful to us, and all the people who just listen and just enjoy this at home. And we never get to interact with you, but I know you're hearing this and thinking about it. You're subscribing. Thank you to all of you. For those who want to support us, we have the Patreon. It's Superhero Ethics on Patreon.com. There's a link in the show notes. You can also buy our stuff at the Tea Republic. We have some really handsome t-shirts and mouse pads and all that kind of good stuff. But really the best way to support us is to interact. Send us a tweet. Find us on Facebook. On both Twitter and Facebook, we are Superhero Ethics. You can email us at superheroethics@gmail.com. You can also find us. Each of us individually is on Twitter. I am myself Caped Ethicist, And Jacob, you are Boxcar
People too, where the R is the letter R.
Yep. And again, both those will be in the show notes. So, guys, thank you all for being such great listeners. We look forward to bringing you a more stationary experience coming soon. We've got a lot of great things coming up. But thank you for listening. Thank you for supporting. And now it is no longer time to be talking ethics. It's time for us to go be doing ethics. Have a good day.
Sure. Whoop.
This is life and death karaoke.
Got out of town on a boat, going to southern islands. Sailing I reach for a following sea. She was making for the trades on the outside, on the downhill run to Papeete. Neath the winds on this heading line, the Marquesas bring out 80 feet of one line, nicely making way from a noisy bar in Avalon. I tried to call you, but on the midnight watch I realized why twice she ran away. Think about how many times I have fallen. Spirits are using me, larger voices calling. What heaven brought you and me cannot be forgotten. I have been around the world, looking for that woman, girl, who knows love can endure, and you know it will, and you know it will. When you see that Southern Cross for the first time, you understand now why it came this way. 'Cause the truth you might be running from is so small, but it's as big as the promise of a coming day. So I'm sailing for tomorrow, my dreams are dying. My love's like an anchor tied to you, tied with a silver chain. I have my ship, and all the flags are flying. She is all that I have left, and music is her name. Think about how many times I have fallen. Spirits are using me, larger voices calling. What heaven brought you and me cannot be forgotten. I have been around the world, looking for that woman, girl, who knows love can endure, and you know it will, and you know it will. And we lied, and we tested, but we never failed to fail. It was the easiest thing to do. I will survive being bested. Somebody fine, come along, make me forget about loving you. And the Southern Cross. Not my best performance, but there it is.
It's just such a fucking good song.
I love that song so much.
One day when we sing that, we'll actually figure out who's going to do which harmony.
Oh.
But part of it is that I think like there's some lines where it's hard to actually tell. Their blend is so good
Yeah.
that it's hard to tell.
There's 3 of them, and it's hard to pick out just 2.
Right.
Yep.